I suppose, our keynote speaker. Jamie is our keynote speaker today, and he's going to take us through the next significant portion of the session. Jamie, I suppose just to give a bit of context to Jamie, Jamie is a graduate of Maynooth University, where he did the Masters in Community Work and Youth Work. And he also now subsequently works in Maynooth University, but previously worked as a community work practitioner in a variety of roles, including in Galway City Community Network, which is the PPN in Galway, but also in a freelance capacity. And he's had a long and deep commitment and interest to environmental justice, to climate change and climate justice, and he really leads out on that work in Maynooth University and the programme that he's on there. He also is the convener of the Community Work Ireland Climate Justice Working Group, and has previously been involved as a board member with Friends of the Earth Ireland, and prior to that, Friends of the Earth, Young Friends of the Earth in a European context, along with a variety of other roles. So he's bringing a wealth, I suppose, of experience and knowledge to us today, which he's going to kindly share and generate discussion around the issue of climate change and climate justice. So I'm going to hand over to you, Jamie, if that's okay, for the next period of time.
Thanks, Ciara. I wasn't expecting that to be as embarrassing as it was.
Apologies.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, it's lovely to be here with you all. And I'm going to start by asking you to do a little exercise. Literally a little exercise. I'd like you to stand up in your seat and just stretch out a bit, because we've been on a call here for at least half an hour already. And as you do a bit of stretching, I want you to think about what comes to mind for you when you think about climate change, and when you think about the climate crisis, the reality of what we're facing. And if you could just step back so we can just about see, you can see the screen and we can see you. I'm going to ask you to make a human statue. You can do it in your seat if you need to. So make a human statue which depicts the feelings which arise for you when you think about the climate crisis. And we'll just take a quick look at what it's bringing up for people. Okay, so some hands in the air. Some people put their hands across their belly. Maybe that's sort of a defiant or a protective stance. People putting a lot of shocked faces, a lot of people covering their eyes, covering their mouths. Yeah, so a mixture of moods there. I'm hoping that by the end of the session, we'll all come out with something like this, ready to go, arms, sleeves rolled up. So let's see how we go. I think it's just useful to start with that and acknowledge that, we're talking, as professionals here, we're talking about practice and policy, but also we are all, faced with the crisis ourselves in our own personal lives and having to deal personally with the reality of the climate crisis and the news that we get, on a regular basis, and we're all human beings at the end of the day. So just to acknowledge that starting point, we might be here thinking about how can we support communities, but also it's important for us to recognize we need to look after ourselves in all of this. So I'm going to share my screen now. Can everybody see that? It's having the same issue as. How's that?
If you're using a second screen, Jamie, take out the second screen and then share. Should be.
Can you see me there?
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, that looks good. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's a tall task really to be able to cover everything that and all the expectations that people have asked for by the end of the session. But really, what I'm hoping that we will come away with are three things. So I'm hoping that you'll feel resourced to understand the issues of climate change relevant to practice. And we're not going to be able to cover every single issue, but that you at least have the resources to be able to do that for yourself when we need today. Secondly, that you feel ready to take some practical action for climate justice in your work and be equipped with some ideas for your practice. And then thirdly, to feel confident, to link with like-minded practitioners as we are today, to campaign for just climate policy. And I think that these three things are really crucial to aim for, both individually and together, in order to begin to address climate justice collectively and structurally and strategically as practitioners. It's about resourcing ourselves, it's about taking practical action in our communities, and it's also working together to ensure that we see political change for climate justice. So just a note then on the slides. I've designed the slides in a way as a sort of a resource pack for you to take away with at the end of the day. And so wherever you see the little book symbol, that's a sort of signpost to a link or a resource or a website that you'll find more information on. So this in a way is a sort of a signposting exercise, a whistle-stop tour, rather than a really comprehensive, and detailed look at absolutely everything we could look at. So I'm not a climate scientist. I have to put my hands up and say that from the start. So in order to give us a bit of the scientific basis, I'm going to turn to Bill Nye, the science guy. And we have a short video here from Bill Nye giving us the climate change 101. And I think it's important just to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of the science. So let's hear from Bill.
We hear it so much that it feels like a buzzword. But
Can I just check, is everybody hearing the sound from the video there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's far from it. Climate change is a real and serious issue. But isn't the climate always changing? What exactly is climate change? Why should we care? Well, the Earth's climate has changed throughout history. Most of these slight changes are caused by small variations in the Earth's orbit. But climate change as we know it today is characterized by an abrupt increase in the Earth's temperature. It is estimated to have gotten 1.2 to 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit warmer in just the last century. 10 out of the last 13 years were the warmest on record. 97% of climate scientists agree that this new tendency is not caused by the variations of the Earth's orbit, but rather very likely caused by human activities. That means you, me. And since the Industrial Revolution, we have come a long way. Humans built airplanes, faster cars, developed remarkable technology, and learned how the natural resources around us can be used for our benefit. Although this has led to many wonderful inventions and advancements, like the device you're using to watch this video, or the ability to take a plane halfway around the world, it also means we've increased our consumption of natural resources and in turn released a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, greenhouse gases occur naturally, but in excess can be dangerous to our planet. Modern human activities have increased the release of non-naturally occurring greenhouse gases because we have stepped up our demand for burning fossil fuels. The composition of greenhouse gases traps heat radiated from the sun. The more heat they trap, the warmer our planet gets. And as our planet gets warmer, we begin to feel the effects. One of climate change's biggest victims is our oceans. Oceans regulate the Earth's temperature and provide 50% of the Earth's oxygen. But climate change has increased the global temperature of the oceans by more than 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. Although a warmer ocean might seem inviting to a beachgoer, it actually has devastating consequences for supporting life at sea. One of those consequences is ocean acidification, a direct effect of increased dissolved CO2. Since the late 18th century, ocean surface acidification has increased by 30%. A higher acid content means calcifying species, like oysters and clams, shallow water corals, are at risk, putting the entire ocean food web at risk. This is bad news for the 1 billion people relying on the ocean as its primary source of protein. Climate change has also caused the sea level to rise. Just in the last century, sea levels have risen 6.7 inches, but the rate in the last decade is nearly doubled. Sea levels have risen because as the ocean gets warmer, it swells. On top of that, glaciers and ice sheets are melting. Antarctica lost 36 cubic miles of ice between 2002 and 2005. And since 1994, each year on average, the Earth has lost 400 billion tons from its glaciers. That's like an ice cube 7.5 kilometers on a side, 4 miles on a side, melting and flowing into the sea. When all that ice melts, it fills up our oceans, and just like filling up a bathtub, the shores can't hold all that water, and coastal regions get flooded. Troubling signs of climate change are increased extreme weather events. Natural disasters like floods, tornadoes, and deadly heat waves are more obvious to humans because of their immediate impact and their sharing of the images in the media. Climate change, as we know it today, is change in our Earth's overall temperature with massive and permanent ramifications. Although its consequences can be planet-threatening, scientists still believe there are things we can do on a personal level to help. Recycle and reuse things. Walk or use public transportation to get to work. Turn off your electronics when you're not using them. Eat less meat. While you're at it, eat more locally grown vegetables and foods. And last but not least, spread your knowledge and concerns about climate change with others. When it comes to climate change, the main takeaway is that it's real. And although we are part of the cause, we can also be part of the solution.
So thanks to Bill there for that. And just to clarify, he was speaking in Fahrenheit, so apologies for that. But in Celsius terms, we're at around about 1.1 degrees Celsius of warming on average globally at this point. So does anybody want to jump in with any clarifying questions or any comments on what you just saw before we move on?
I suppose it's around talking about solutions rather than frightening figures, and because we do live on an island.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is
also something that always comes into my mind is we live in a consumer-driven society, so yeah, we do have to take personal responsibility, but isn't it industry and agriculture, they're the ones doing the damage at our consumer request kind of thing. So it's about bringing that into real day-to-day terms and how to translate that to within a community. Because I don't like the approach of blaming individuals, but obviously we are responsible, but it's looking at the bigger picture and how if we don't use something that's available, it doesn't become our responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. Two really, really important points that I heard there. One about the need for the focus on solutions rather than the doom story, and then the second one around recognizing that we live in industrial societies that have collectively caused the problem, and the focus on individual behavior change masks the problem. I think they're really, you're getting to the kind of the heart of the matter there in terms of community work analysis of it. Yeah. Would anybody else like to come in?
just linked to what Pauline was saying there, I think that bit about our purchasing power and how we spend money. So everybody buys groceries, everybody buys, that individual action can be linked to kind of political moves and how to kind of collectivize that a bit as well.
I find the metaphors of addition and multiplication helpful in thinking about this. That we all have individual responsibilities as consumers, and we can make a choice and make a change. But that's like addition. Whereas what we need now is multiplication. We need policy change that drives structural change to begin to address the crisis at the scale and the pace that it needs to be addressed at. So I'm gonna share again. Oh no, I've gone for the wrong one now.
Seems to be the theme of the day.
Sorry, everybody. Okay, great. So,
You're not sharing, Jamie?
am I not?
No.
I'm still sharing, and you can see the full screen. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're right, Pauline. We shouldn't be focused, overly focused on the doom and gloom, but it is important to be aware of it. And we have the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, giving us the scientific consensus on the latest, research around climate change, now telling us that the evidence is unequivocal. That climate change is a threat to human well-being and a threat to the health of the planet, and that at this point, any further delay in concerted global action, and by concerted global action, they mean, collective political action on a global scale, will miss the brief, rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. So these are scientists making these claims, and part of the issue over the last 20 years is that the scientists have been very hesitant to make big and dramatic statements such as this. They've been looking at the evidence since the 1970s and 80s, and only when they could finally say that it's unequivocal have they been shouting as loudly as they are today. So to have this statement from the consensus of the IPCC is really quite a dramatic thing to get from scientists, and it's clear that we are now at the point where we have a very small window of opportunity to make the changes we need to make globally. So the issues are very, very serious, and we need to recognize that there are a whole series of vulnerabilities that we face now as a result of climate change. And these vulnerabilities affect us across every aspect of society and of the biosphere. We've got pollination issues, and we see the renewed efforts now of the tidy towns in Antarctica to promote No Mow May and other initiatives looking at addressing the pollination crisis. Coastal protection and flooding, as we see the rise of sea levels and more erratic weather, and that's going to impact on tourism and recreation, on food sources in the ocean, as Bill Nye pointed out, on health, on access to clean water, clean air, and the overall sort of regulation of our climate, and the ability of the climate to keep us within a safe operating limit. To sort of balance out the extreme weather effects. This vulnerability then has a particular set of risks for human populations, and particularly if we're looking at Europe, we can expect all of these four risks in Europe and in Ireland to face us in the coming years. So heat stress and the additional exposure to both heat waves and cold snaps being a challenge for communities, and particularly for younger people and for older people who are less resilient to those heat stress challenges. Water scarcity, as our ability to have access to good quality and clean water for both human consumption and for agriculture becomes more and more precarious. Food security, as the ability to generate good quality and healthy food for all is undermined by climate change, and we see other things impacting on that. For example, at the moment, the Ukraine war and the impact that's having on grain and grain prices and grain stocks across the world. So there are other threat sort of multipliers that will also exacerbate the impact of climate change. And then we've got flood risks, and we see that, of course, in the coastal regions, but also in other low-lying regions such as the Midlands of Ireland and the flooding around Shannon, Roscommon, and in the Midlands becoming an increasing issue. So when we begin to think about climate change, we need to recognise that it's for a long time we've thought about it as something that's happening far away, and that it's something that we need to do. We need to take action on to be in solidarity with, say, communities in the global south. Now, in effect, it's coming home to roost. The impact of our use of fossil fuels to support our industrial growth and development in Europe and in North America and in other global north countries has driven us to this point where we're faced with the vulnerabilities and the risks here in Ireland. But of course, that risk and that vulnerability isn't going to be distributed equally. Some people have more ability to be resilient and to respond to the risk than others. And again, this points to questions of justice, of equality and human rights that will be sort of front and center to a community work response to climate change, because the communities and the groups of people that we work with and stand with are the ones who will be most first and worst impacted by the vulnerabilities of climate change, as we'll see. So I want to do an exercise now that gets us thinking about some of the justice issues and implications of the climate crisis. And so I'm going to pop a couple of statements into the chat, and we'll open up a whiteboard here on the screen. So let me just pop the statements in the chat. And if we imagine a spectrum line, if we imagine we were all in the room together, and let's say over on the left here is your agree. Sorry for my terrible writing here. And over here on the right, we have our disagree. What I'd like you to do now is, starting with the first statement, and we'll just say we'll use numbers here. So let's number them 1 to 5. So the first statement is, the most important thing we can do for climate justice is to take personal responsibility for our own actions and for our carbon footprints. So if you agree with that statement, I want you to put a number 1 up by the A, and if you disagree with it, a number 1 down by the D, or if you fall somewhere in between, between agree and disagree, put your number 1 wherever you feel you fall. So the most important thing we can do for climate justice is to take personal responsibility for our actions and our carbon footprints. Pauline, you've given us food for thought on this already.
Do we type that into the chat?
So if you can see the whiteboard, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but how do I write on it?
Yeah.
How do you write on it though?
You can't write. I can't.
You
write.
have to
can
go
do it there.
into the options at the top and you click on and annotate.
No, there should be a whiteboard option at the bottom of your screen. You know where
It's
all
not
of the pictures.
It's not at the bottom of the screen, but if you go into the view options at the top, where
Annotate, yeah.
it says annotate, you can then go in and add your number.
Okay.
Oh, very good.
Oh, so I see some people are writing 3 and 2, but
Oh,
they're the
Sorry.
numbers of the questions.
how do you
That's like
do
one.
that?
We can erase.
You can erase there, yeah.
So this is question 1 we're dealing with.
We're dealing with question 1, so use just number 1 at this point. And I'm glad to see other people are as bad as me in Zoom drawing.
It's the most important thing is getting me. It's not that I don't think it's really, 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 really important, but do I think it's the most important?
Mhm.
I'm the same, Anne. Yeah, it's the most bit.
So we have a couple of people who are strongly disagreeing. Would you like to maybe tell us a little bit about why you're down at the strongly disagree? And
Well, I'm the blue number one down towards that end. I didn't quite mean to go as far down. I think it's back to the most important thing is what was getting me, because I disagree that it's the most important thing. I do think we've huge individual responsibility and accountability, but I think if you look at the communities with whom community workers are working with, where people are dealing with such a variety of intense struggles on a day-to-day basis just to keep a roof over their head in particular at the moment, as well as food on the table. I think if you're asking those people in those communities are affected by issues in that way, it can't be the most important thing they can do. So I suppose maybe I misjudged it a little bit. I think in my own life it's a really important thing I can do, because you kind of lead by example, but it's definitely not the most important. I think it's asking too much. I think obviously there's individual responsibility, but I think we need leadership. This is something we need, serious leadership that takes into account the different starting points people are coming from. So that's why I disagree.
thanks, and feel
I've
free
done it wrong at first, Jamie. Sorry, I've done. It was supposed to be down the disagree and more to disagree, and similarly, because the people that we work with and ourselves, like living in communities that are already experiencing disadvantage, marginalisation, and all. There's so much more going on that sometimes it can't be the most important thing. Like, because even I was thinking about in terms of fast fashion and the impact that can have on global climate, a whole lot and all. It's impossible for some of the people we work with to use anything other than fast fashion. So that's why I'd be more down on the disagree end of it, which I did it wrong. I done down the other end. And then when you said that, so now I was supposed to be down there end. I learned how to rub out though.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody who is up at the agree end, would you like to share a little bit about why you decided to put yourself there? Or those who are more up there than the disagree? Damien, I see you're kind of edging towards agree.
Yeah, I just found out how to do that. I was looking for A's. I heard that on a tape button. Then you caught me just doing it at the end. Yeah, I'm in agreement that it's one of the most important, not the statements is an absolute. So I'm moving it towards that. I think, the personal responsibility ties into the fact that it's our responsibility to look for those who are going to make the political changes, the policy shifts, the changes in that level too, that it is just up to us to ensure that the people that we can, like we do with lots of other things in community work, that we bring that to the attention and try and get the mobilization around this issue, so that our responsibility is to get to change, to get people to change, to get the governments to change, to get the policies to change, to protect those who are experiencing poverty, to protect those who are most at risk of all the things you talked about, the heat stresses, the water scarcity, the food security, and the flood risks, that it's the most vulnerable in our society that will be impacted by these issues. And I think that we have to take responsibility for that and start to because we are the ones who vote in the governments, we are the ones who put the policy, the agenda, these issues on the agenda. So that's why I was moving towards there. But I accept exactly what Pauline just said there, that for very many people, it's daily survival, getting the food on the table, getting clothes to wear, getting, are going to be decisions people make, and we have to make them easier for them.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to come in on this one before we keep going?
I was a bit the same, so I was kind of in the middle there, and I was looking at it as personal action in terms of personal living and all of that and choices, but then also the bit about, as Damien was saying, the personal action, which is around the pushing for change, the pushing for policy change and commitment. So at that level.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Or Rachel, sorry. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's not surprising to have a room full of community workers saying all of that, and you won't be surprised that I absolutely agree with y'all. The reason why I wanted to start with this statement is to draw out some of that, that wisdom that you have, because I think this is something that we really need to make as our starting point when we look at climate policy, because the overarching trend in Ireland and globally is to emphasize personal responsibility, personal choices, and then to have policy measures that incentivize individual consumer behavior, rather than collective and structural action. And so this is a challenge for us as workers for two reasons. I think one is that it's not fast enough, and unless we're going as fast as we possibly can, then we're putting the communities that are most vulnerable at more and more risk. And then number two, as many of you have said, it's placing a burden of responsibility unduly on those who are already facing poverty and disadvantage to begin, to expect them to start to buy organic food, or start to buy ecological washing powder, or start to have an electronic vehicle, or put solar panels on the roofs. As consumers, making those choices is unfair and unjust, and placing a burden of responsibility onto people that they shouldn't have to shoulder. And interestingly, the very concept of carbon footprint itself, does anybody know where it came from?
No.
I'm sure it's
I do actually. I heard this on the radio recently. It was an oil company who created it so that they could basically make people feel a bit better about using energy.
Is that Natasha?
Yes, sorry, it is.
Yeah.
It's to shift the
To shift the responsibility away,
themselves.
to the consumer in relation to energy consumption.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was BP, British Petroleum, in the 1990s. Their marketing department, their board of directors realized, we're going to get fingered here for the responsibility that we have for trashing the planet. So what can we do to direct the responsibility away from us and the other companies? And their marketing department hit on this idea. Well, let's get people to measure their carbon footprint and begin to take personal responsibility for their consumption, rather than recognizing the reality that we're locked into carbon intensive systems, that we don't have a choice but to use our car because our public transport systems aren't good enough. We don't have a choice but to use fossil fuels because our housing stock is of poor quality, or whatever the case may be. So directing the choices, or the responsibility towards the individual, is the first thing we need to be aware of as workers, to shift the discourse back to, what's the responsibility of government, what's the responsibility of industry, and what do we need to do collectively rather than individually. So secondly, then we have another statement: science and technology can address the problem and solve the climate crisis. So if you agree with that, stick a number 2 down near the A, and if you disagree, stick it down near the D.
Jamie, could you just repeat that one, please?
Sorry, Anna, it's science and technology can address the problem and solve the climate crisis. So we have very few people agreeing with that, which is interesting. Maybe those who are in the middle, do you want to tell us a bit about why you're there, and then we can go to the strong disagrees?
I'm happy to, it's Natasha here, I'm happy to come in on the middle there. I think that there is use, like for example, us using technology to, stop us getting in our cars. I don't think it's necessarily going to help make things any better, because what we're doing is we're using up more energy in terms of technology, increase in data centers, I suppose consuming website content, internet content. So I suppose I'd be in the middle on that one.
Thanks. Yeah.
Um,
Anybody else in the middle?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the middle on it as well. Like, while I do agree that it can help, like if you're thinking about electric cars and all, like that still have to be policies brought in and all, you know, support for people who can't afford to retrofit their homes and get, you know, electric cars and all that. It's not as easy as just everyone go electric and not use fossil fuels and so on, you know.
Yeah.
Like there has to be something to support people to do that.
Yeah. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, I'll jump in here on this one as well. I think science and technology has a huge role to play in informing the response and potential answers, but it's political will that will actually make a difference in terms of whether that is used and built upon or not. And I think that I've kind of stuck it sort of probably just the disagree side of the middle, because I think it's got a really fundamental role to play, and I don't think we'll ever get anywhere without it. But it's the political will that will use that information and that knowledge, and whether it does or not is what will make the difference.
Yeah, I think you're right, Anna. And I think to add to that, the other aspect that I think is important to include is ethics as well, because today, you know, a lot of the mainstream thinking around this is that science and technology will enable us to keep going as we're going without making any great changes to how we've organized our society. And so we have people like Elon Musk championing technology as a response to the climate crisis, and his vision is, you know, heading off to Mars to exploit that planet when we've crashed this one. So the ethics of an over-reliance on science and technology, I think, are really questionable, you know, and it really continues to replicate that model of, you know, the white European man, you know, the rational kind of scientific worldview that has become dominant since the Enlightenment, having the ability to extract and control the resources of the earth and other communities and peoples on the earth, and so it can be quite dangerous actually to have an emphasis totally on science and technology, decoupled from, as you say, politics and from ethics.
But as you say, Jamie, it was the scientists who are the ones who've been raising this flag forever and not being listened to. So I suppose they're the ethical scientists.
Yes.
And that intergovernmental panel and all of that, that's science led. And then if we can't move towards sustainable energy like solar and wind and hydro without science and technology to do that. But it's the balance bit, isn't it?
Yeah. And the other thing, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to add to that before you come in, I think that for all of the science and technological solutions, there's a fallout as well. You know, electric cars, the minerals, for example, that it takes to create the batteries are in very short supply. So and if we look towards eventually nuclear energy, that's also going to have. So all of the solutions have a fallout. And for me, science and technology can't address the problem fully because the problem is actually capitalism, and that's the fundamental. And unless we actually deal with the economics of it and the economic systems of it, then we're not going. It's just going to be creating other issues down the road.
I think you're so right, and it's based on this model of consuming. So instead of consuming, you know, product A, consume product B, and fundamentally we still have these huge global corporations maintaining and protecting profit margins while individuals are expected to adapt and change. Yeah. And even that, the electric cars, I think, is such a good example. Like, was it Leo Varadkar who had, I don't know, projected so many million additional electric cars in Ireland in whatever 5 years or 10 years. And you're going, well, what about all the current cars then? Are they going to landfill, or what's happening to them? And, you know, the things we have are actually the most environmentally, oftentimes are the most environmentally correct option, you know, to use what you have and to reuse and to make it greener rather than creating something new. Yeah. So it's about that idea of, well, how are we using it? Is it just to keep to generate profit, or to sustain this idea of consumption, you know, or to change the culture, the attitude around that?
Yeah, I think those 3 points have really hit the nail on the head. It was kind of what I was going to come in on and talk about as well, is that we've a tendency in policy to assume that we can use science and technology to reduce emissions, clean the pollution, and to just keep growing and keep consuming. And so there's an assumption in Irish and in European policy, you know, with the European Green Deal and the Irish and the new Climate Action Plan, that we can decouple pollution from growth, and we can have a thing that they're calling green growth. When we know, from the work of people like E.F. Schumacher since the 1970s, that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. You know, there has to be a point where we've run out of room to grow, and so the more sort of progressive economists now are talking about the idea of degrowth, and how do we support well-being without consumption, endless consumption. So we might move on to the next statement, and I'm conscious we're due to take a break in just 2 minutes. The next statement is, we need carbon taxation in order to reduce our emissions. So we need carbon taxation in order to reduce our emissions. And I invite you to put a number 3 somewhere along the spectrum, wherever you feel you stand.
There's a but there, though. We need carbon taxation in order to reduce our emissions. But
I think we need to be real about it. The people who are using the carbon need to be taxed on it, not the people who live in the area that the carbon, you know.
Can you say a bit more about that, Polly?
It's more that it's taking the emphasis off the personal and putting it onto the industry, who are claiming to do it on the consumer's behalf. Because I was looking at something recently around climate action, and it was saying we use, say, 50 gallons of water a day, but something like 40 of them gallons was the local factories preparing the food that we were going to buy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it was totally disproportionate, or rather people aren't aware of what other people are doing on our behalf and how to change that.
Yeah. So again, it's that structural view. You know, what are the systems that the food systems, the energy systems, the transportation systems that we're living within, that we have no ability to change through individual choice.
Yeah. And taking it back to community, the communities we're involved with, it's ways of making all these avenues transparent at a level that people can understand. You know, instead of being bombarded with carbon taxation and reduce our emissions, it's language literacy, so you get people's interest.
Yeah. Thanks, Polly. Yeah. Daryl, I saw you were one of the strongly agree people. Do you want to say a bit about what put you there?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I suppose, like, fundamentally, like, we live in a capitalist society. So, I mean, if industry are trying to make profits and they're being hindered by taxation, they're going to look to alternatives, which I think in many cases already exist. But, you know, if they're going to make more money doing something else, they're going to choose that route. So I totally agree with what other people have said in terms of, you know, not putting that tax on individuals, especially communities that are already struggling. But I think ultimately, you know, it's the big players that would suffer if it was done properly.
Mhm, mhm. Thanks. And Anne, you were a yes, but do you want to tell us your but?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think they're really, I think they have a role to play, but I also think that they're a very blunt instrument. You know, they tend to be universal. So unless for me, the but is protecting marginalized communities who cannot afford to pay more, and the imposition of carbon taxation might push people to using, for example, you know, dirtier coal or cheaper fuel, or, you know, that will force people into making decisions that can affect their health, basically.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry, Damien, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I agree with Anne, because I was thinking of the water charges and the issues that arose out of water charges. Like, you know, what tries to happen is people try to get an understanding of the value of water and the need to protect this valuable resource. But, you know, taxation isn't always the best answer, you know. So what's the outcome and the purpose that what's the change that we're seeking, and how might we try and address that change to other mechanisms? And while I do think carbon taxation, like, there might be a place for that for the people that can afford it and are polluting the planet. It's not what we just don't want to keep polluting the planet and people paying for it, because that's so what's the change that we really need to see happening? And that's where my three is more to the agree, but still, to the center, that I think there's something about the change, and then what is that change about? Because we want to stop pollution, we want to stop the carbon emissions rather than just make people pay for them and keep polluting, because those who can afford it will do that.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I mean, you've really, you've drawn out the kind of the justice analysis and implications of carbon taxation really well. And it is exactly that, you know, that we have this environmental principle of the polluter pays, and that's enshrined in, you know, in a whole range of environmental legislation. And we established at Rio in 1992, the Rio Earth Summit, that this would be a global legal principle moving forward, that we need to shift behavior through making those who pollute pay for it. And in general, that seems like a good idea, but as we've seen here in the discussion, that has all sorts of implications for, you know, in terms of how it plays out with communities and individuals who are marginalized or disadvantaged. So it comes to be a sort of a binary between the polluter pays principle and then the ability to pay, you know, who actually can afford to pay. And as you rightly say, Damien, those who can really afford to pay can just pay to continue to pollute without changing their behavior. So a taxation instrument which is designed to incentivize behavioral change doesn't necessarily achieve the outcome you want. And as Anne and others mentioned, you know, it does come down to a question of, you know, is it fair to implement a tax on those who don't have the ability to change their behavior, or don't have the the resources to begin to use renewables rather than fossil fuels, or stop cutting turf, or insulate their homes to ensure their energy prices or energy use is less. So a taxation policy measure may be useful to some extent, but we need to make sure that it's accompanied with strong redistributive measures to ensure that the burden doesn't fall worst on those less able to pay, and to ensure that the communities, particularly the ones that we're working with, are supported to make the changes that they need to make, so they don't need to use fossil fuels in the first place. So again, it goes back to retrofitting public transportation, housing stock, you know, all these other questions, and how are we making sure that we're supporting communities in those ways. And just to point out, the carbon tax at present stands at €41 per tonne, and it's due to increase by 750 per year over the rest of the decade, until it reaches 100 per ton in 2030. So that's the sort of trajectory that we're on. And so we, and that's sort of set in as much as anything can be set in stone, that's set in stone as a policy measure. So the question for us then is, of course, how do we keep raising the question of equity and justice and fairness in that, and keep ensuring that there's a focus on other measures. So we've run a bit over for our break time. I'll hand back over to Kira, who's sort of managing the logistics to guide us.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, we had set aside half an hour break, but I think given like what still has to be got through, if people are okay, we'll just leave it. I still come back at 1:45, which was the time we were to return. It gives people 25 minutes to grab a cup of tea, coffee, quick bite to eat. Is everyone okay with that? Jamie, would you mind stop sharing the screen actually? So yeah, sorry, apologies. Are people okay with that generally if we take to 1:45? Quarter to two, apologies. Quarter to two. I'm out of sync with the day. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to have to go. I won't be able to join back in again. It's been really brilliant, and I'm sorry I missed the rest, but this has been recorded, so we're going to be able to access it.
Yeah, we'll share it with everybody who participated today, Damien. Yeah.
Brilliant. That's brilliant.
I'm just going to pause it now for the
perfect. I think we have everyone back pretty much, Jamie.
Great. Yeah. And I see some comments in the chat there in response to you, Pauline, from Maria and Maria, some good suggestions. Sorry. Okay, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, you're with me so far. Okay, so I have a couple more. I have two more statements to discuss. Do you want to keep going with the statements, or would you want to move on from that? How are you finding the discussion around the statements?
I think the next two are actually really important ones, Jamie.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Well, we'll keep going. So you should still have them in the chat. So the next one is that the communities we work with can't afford to be green. We'll bring up our lovely whiteboard. So this is number 4. And feel free to use the bottom.
Will you just repeat the statement, Jamie? Sorry.
The statement is the communities that we work with can't afford to be green.
Thanks.
Yeah, so quite a lot of 4s up on the agree end. Again, we might look at the outlier. So the person who's in the middle, top middle, the big 4 there. Would you like to share?
Hi, Jamie, that's me. Yeah. I just think it comes back to the previous discussion, I guess, that the response or being green is like something that you have to buy. So if you don't have, like, being green is having an electric car, for example, but you're able to be green without that. So I think it's more of a nuanced space rather than that black and white, and it's around attitude and approach necessarily rather than consumption habits, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So when we use that metric, I think sometimes it's used as oh, well, there's no point because they can't afford, or why do that there? Because you need to have resources to do that, but you don't have to buy things to be green, I guess is my point.
Yeah, no, interesting one. Yeah, thanks for it. Would anybody else like to come in on this one?
I think in terms of, like, if you're looking at being green in terms of recycling now, many people don't like that, the bins and all, like the way some people can't afford to put their bins. And I know that would be an item that's only 20 euros, 40 euros a month. That's a lot for some families. And I know Greyhound will claim that the recycling is free, but yeah, if you happen to miss your direct debit, your recycling is left outside your door until that bill is paid. So it's not really free, so there is that part as well, with things as simple as recycling. Some people just.
Yeah, and I think going back to the bins there around getting education and an understanding around the importance of the brown bin, because people are put off it by insects, whereas not if people knew how toxic it is in the landfill, they might change their mind, like simple things like that. Because if you have a bin account, I know the rural areas it's different, but if you have a bin account, you have 3 bins. But so many people opt out with the brown bin simply because of insects.
Yeah, and voice again. I've done quite a lot of work in educating and producing resources for people to understand the nuances of recycling and how to go about it. I'm conscious we haven't heard from a couple of people like Siobhan and Mary. I don't want to put you on the spot, but if anything you'd like to contribute, or David.
Yeah, well, just in Donegal in general here, for ourselves, to buy a green car would be expensive, but we don't have the say the electricity support to plug in our cars. That's one simple thing. And the same with our clientele that we have. They're on social welfare benefits. They're on a budget each week. They can't afford good fruit and vegetables. You know, they can go into Lidl and get as much as they can and try and eat good food, but it is hard on a limited budget. You know, if they have 2 or 3 kids or whatever. So all of these are factors of, you know, changing that you'd like them to be able to do, but they can't, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Really interesting to have that rural perspective as well from Donegal.
Even adding on to that point as well is about you know, even recycling in the home, I think is much more difficult when you're living rurally. You know, I don't think there's as much, like I would often see people burning rubbish locally here, and you know, things like that, which, you know, you just wouldn't do other ways, you know, in other places. So I think there's kind of that kind of, it's nearly like something else that needs to be done, or it's not really in people's mindsets, especially that kind of middle to older generation of people. You know, it's just not on their mind.
It's interesting you mentioned that, Siobhan, because, you know, that older generation are also the people who would have, you know, done a lot of the practices that we're now talking about returning to, like, you know, reusing things, storing things in glass jars rather than using plastic. You know, having a knowledge around, you know, local food, being able to grow or being able to forage, you know, particularly in rural areas, or going picking winkles on the seashore, you know. So I think there's a lot to be said for the knowledge that we can gain from listening to older people in the community around these sorts of things that have become fashionable again.
Definitely, I would agree with that. Yeah, it's just, I suppose it's just a time factor as well, just taking the time to do it, and to, you know, teach our young people about it as well, you know.
Yeah.
I think from an affordability point of view, there's been so much in the last couple of years where it's the big ticket items that people are focusing on. So your house renovations, your electric cars, and they're the things that are going to make the difference. Whereas just the small everyday things seem to have been forgotten, and they're the things that people on low incomes can actually maybe contribute a little bit more. But all the focus seems to be on the big, huge ticket items now. I don't know whether it's a money thing or what it is, because look, it's always going to be follow the money, and they're things you have to actually spend to believe you're having as much of an impact. But I think a lot of the day-to-day stuff, you know, there's a piece of work to be done around that, and just emphasizing to people that, look, you know, you mightn't be able to afford 20 grand to retrofit, but you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And like, as pilloried as he gets at times, and unfortunately he's kind of become a parody figure of himself, Eamon Ryan, like, he makes good suggestions, but when he does, he's just absolutely slated, and someone else comes out and makes the exact same suggestion the next day, and oh, it's a great idea all of a sudden, you know. It's bananas, like, you know. But yeah, like, they're the real little things that can have a collective impact.
Just on the kind of the poverty sort of issue, I suppose the thing about it is that it isn't people who are living in poverty that are having the biggest detrimental effect on the environment. It's the overconsumption by those who have the most resources that's actually the major problem. So it's not very poor people who are driving cars in the first place necessarily, or like they're most likely to be using, they're the ones most likely to use public transport, or to not be putting the heat on all day long in their houses if they can afford oil in the first place, or to, you know, they're the ones who are wearing their coats to keep warm. So I think that to say that, you know, poor people can't be green, they probably are a lot greener in actual fact than a lot of rich people. And then I also was thinking about travelers, you know, because their whole history of recycling and the traveler economy has always been a massive thing. Recycling metal, recycling, you know, sort of batteries, recycling, that was always a huge part of the traveler economy, and it was a very green economy actually. So I just think that it's how we see it, I suppose, and I don't want it to become a thing like, oh, poor communities, they can't afford to be green, therefore it's their you know, they're the problem then, because they're not doing the things that we're doing with our electric cars.
That's where it comes down to messaging, you know, and that's not making people feel like they're not making an impact because they're not doing this and they're not doing that. So it comes down to messaging.
Yeah.
I think you're so right in that understanding of what is green then as well, that really needs to be unpacked. So exactly like you're saying, Rachel, we could be celebrating many communities for being greener than other communities. I think it just still comes back to Anne's point there around capitalism though. So I've worked in different communities where families are struggling financially, but will borrow or scrape or pull money together for certain things because you know, there's an expectation or a pressure there. So Christmas, I used to get so frustrated around Christmas time where families would get themselves into huge debt because we have huge big corporations telling them that they need to buy all these things, you know, to make Christmas meaningful. So again, you know, it's back to I'm not sure who said it, the man who just spoke before me, that idea of messaging and what is meaningful and what is worthwhile and what's valuable, that it's not just about purchasing, but it's about, you know, putting your energies and your focus onto things. And if that green narrative stays around, you know, affordability and consumption, we're just going to be in the same space we are, I think, or are not going to move as quick as we could, you know. I think there's a huge piece on that to resist that discourse around it, I guess. Yeah.
Natasha, were you going to come in as well?
Sorry, I was just actually just going to go back at it about the responsibility always lying with the individual, and actually it's the industries, and they are the biggest polluters, or the biggest consumers of energy. You know, take a data center for example, you know, whereas it's always back to us as the individual, which is also a bit unfair.
Thanks, everyone. And just to jump back to Mairead's point there, I think it's a really well made one and really important, and it reminded me of Peter Westerby, the community work theorist and writer from Australia. And he speaks about addictive consumerism as being a major issue, sort of destroying the soul of communities, that people are caught into cycles of consuming as a way of sort of filling a void that used to be filled through relationships to each other and to the land, and, you know, other ways of being connected and meeting our needs. I see Paula has to leave us, so thanks for joining, Paula, and hopefully you get back in.
I'll try and get back in a couple of minutes. I just have a important call that I have to take there.
Sure. So I mean, as with all these statements, you know, we could spend hours just sitting around unpacking them all. But for me, one of the things that's really crucial in thinking about the statement, the communities we work with can't afford to be green, and many people have pointed it out, is to think about what do we mean by being green? Are we talking about green again in that sort of techno-capitalist vision of green, where everybody buys their way out of pollution? Or are we talking about being green in terms of returning to older practices that many of the communities we work with might have engaged with traditionally, and are in fact, you know, part of the solution, or potentially part of the solution to the climate crisis? So And you're right, David, Eamon Ryan and the Greens, do get pillared all the time. And I think part of the messaging problem is that they lack a very strong justice or equality analysis of the issue. And they themselves don't come from the marginalized, the disadvantaged communities that are most impacted by the issue. So they don't have a sense of, how do these issues play out for the communities that we work with. And so the way that they frame this, the problem and the solutions doesn't reflect the reality or connect with the reality for many people in the communities that are being impacted by the crisis. So that brings us to our final statement then, number 5. Community workers can play a vital role in supporting climate justice. And I invite you now to put a number 5 on the spectrum, wherever you feel it should go. So far, lots of strong agreement. I don't see anybody past the halfway mark. I think the closest person to halfway is Mary. Mary, would you like to let us know why you put your 5 there?
Sorry, yeah, I'm kind of in between on that one. Just for ourselves, I suppose, the community groups that we work with, and that, we help with employment, so it's not really to do with climate or anything like that. But if they are out working, it's good for themselves, and there's lots of different. So I'm just thinking of my own work and my own community. And I can probably, maybe encourage them while I'm chatting to them. We do a personal action plan and stuff with them on different things about being more substantial in different aspects of their life, So I'm kind of, I don't know whether to agree or disagree, so that's why I was in the middle there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Would anybody else like to come in, either following on from Mary or sharing your own perspective? Seamus.
Hi, Jamie. Yeah, I think I agree with the statement fully. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I got involved in community development in the first place. But I think the important thing for me is that with impoverished communities or disadvantaged communities, it's not, as I think it was Rachel said, their impact isn't that great. It's the people with the private jets. They're really the ones. There's a phrase in England about the real criminals arrive in private jets, not in inflatable dinghies. So I think the role, or one of the roles of community work with those communities would be to protect them, or to work to defend against the kind of necessary adaptation that's going to happen. Like, for example, a carbon tax, which we already discussed, is very inequitable, very unjust and very unfair on people that are on low incomes or on social welfare. And I think what I always keep in my head is the idea that the global communities kind of agreed a few years back in Paris that there was kind of a level that if we could stick to that, we'd be okay. They called it the Paris Agreement. And half the world's population are doing that. They're the people that are living in the global south. But I mean, they have to include some of the very low income people in the rest of the world as well. So, and then there's, so yeah, that's it. Thanks, Jamie.
Jamie, can I come in there? It's Ciara.
Please, Ciara.
Yeah, just I suppose it links to what Seamus was talking. Like, I think community work has a really vital role to play. I put mine down right near agree. If you look at the, community work standards, look at the values of community work: collectivity, community empowerment, participation, social justice, sustainable development. We have a role as workers to build the capacity of communities that we work with to engage with the issues. And also, and part of that is them seeing where the problems are created. And in my, in my assessment, it's kind of built on what Seamus says, those problems are created elsewhere. So for example, if you look in Galway now, you've got lots of big fancy houses being built, and they're full of solar panels, and they're passive, and they've acres of insulation in them, but they have a massive actual physical footprint. So there's all the stuff has to be bought to fill that house. If you compare that to the person in the local authority house who may have a poorly insulated house, might be burning their turf or their coal to keep the house warm when they can afford it. You have to look at where's the problem being caused. It's back to that whole issue of consumerism, and the marginalized communities are going to buy to consume what they need in the main, apart from the odd occasion in the year when they maybe overextend themselves to buy additional goods. But the goods are being sold by big corporations, and they're being bought in the main by people with money. So yeah, we have a role, if you look at the standard or the values of community work, to empower, to build community resilience, to engage with the issue, to build people's capacity to be involved in the decision-making structures where they can influence climate policy, so that the focus is not so much on measures that are going to penalise marginalised communities. I think that's the role community workers have to play, rather than supporting communities to build the knowledge base they need and the skills they need to engage with the issues, so that they're less impacted than they are currently by them.
You should have given this workshop, Ciara.
No, I was just listening to what other people were talking about. It kind of
no. Thank you. That was a really really powerful kind of summary, I think, of the role of community work, or the potential role of community work in addressing the climate crisis. It's not the final word, of course. Would anyone else like to come in and add anything to that? Particularly people we haven't heard too much from, maybe Meg or Enid or Maria.
Oh, I'm not Meg or Enid, but I'll jump in anyway. But just thinking about Seamus's point, and my 5 is up at the agree end as well. And what Ciara was saying, I think what we do see around the world is that whilst disadvantaged and marginalised communities aren't the main cause of a lot of climate change, they certainly are some of the most impacted by it. And that role, I think, Ciara was absolutely spot on. The role of community workers is very much then about supporting that analysis and critical understanding of those issues, in terms of, if we were working with a community that was experiencing economic poverty, we'd be working with them to understand why that was and what was causing it. So looking at some of those root issues, and I think climate action is exactly the same. But interestingly, I also think that there are some marginalised communities around the world, but also here in Ireland, who are really taking a lead in terms of addressing some of these issues as well. And I'm thinking particularly of island communities, small island communities. And I know Rathlin up on the north coast here in the north are doing some really amazing work, and yet that's a small community of less than 200 people, and there's not a huge amount of wealth on Rathlin. But one of the things they've identified was the impact of transport to and from the island, and the carbon footprint of the ferries that they were absolutely reliant upon. And they've done, and the impact on the oceans as well as, sort of more widely. And they've engaged in some really fantastic work to move towards hydro powered ferries to cut down on all of that. And that's just one example. They've got a tremendous amount of work that they're doing with different projects around biodiversity as well. So I think, we can see the impact, but we can also see that actually a lot of small localized communities that are impacted by climate change have also got a lot, we've got a lot to learn from them in terms of the way in which they're responding and holding others to account who put them in that situation as well to a large extent.
Thanks, Hannah. Yeah, you're really very interesting example, and I think you're right. It's often the people on the edges who are doing the most interesting work. And I know, like, in Galway, the example of the Iron Islands Energy Co-op is really interesting as well, moving towards renewable energy on the 3 Iron Islands in Galway Bay, and quite a few community energy projects particularly along the west coast. Tipperary, Claremorris are two ones that stand out, where communities are coming together to generate electricity locally, which saves on their local energy bills, creates community employment, and addresses the need to reduce our emissions. And so we see, when we start to look at the solutions that are available to us locally to climate change, quite a lot of the things that can be done to offset our emissions and build resilience around adaptation to climate risks are also give us positive co-benefits for community employment, for poverty reduction, for health. And so in terms of community development responses to climate change, I think there's a great opportunity actually to link those two things together. And exactly as Ciara mentioned, when we look at the role of community workers, we can begin to bring a sort of traditional focus on supporting people to understand the root causes of issues, supporting people to collectively organize around issues, to bear on the question of climate change, because the root causes of the issue are not in the communities where the impacts are being felt. So it's about supporting those communities to build their resilience to the shocks and to the impacts that we're all going to face, and those who are most marginalized will face first and worst. It's about showing solidarity between communities in Ireland and communities in the south, and between communities in Ireland and across the global north and the south. And again, as Ciara mentioned, it's about participation. It's about ensuring the voices of communities are front and center in the policy making around climate mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation being emissions reduction, the technical term for emissions reduction. So if I share my screen now, and I see we've got about 30 minutes or so left to go before I hand it back over to Ciara and Anna. So again, it's going to be a whistle-stop tour, and forgive me for moving so quickly. Let's hope I get this right. So can everybody see the full screen there?
Yeah.
Okay. So looking towards our standards document, the All-Ireland Standards for Community Work, which, here with the first year students, I told them this was their community work Bible. So they all refer to this document as their Bible. So looking to our community work Bible, there is a focus in the standards in particular on social justice and sustainable development. I think it's crucial that those two are linked together. As workers, we're not just interested in sustainability, but interested in the link between sustainability and justice. And so, as workers, we're encouraged and expected to do the following: to promote environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable policies and practices, to think globally and act locally for the present and for future generations, to pursue social justice and sustainable development with a concern for the redistribution of wealth, power, and resources in society, to mitigate against the effects of climate change, and to ensure equal access to a good quality environment for all. And then finally, remember that rights are interrelated, interdependent, and intersectional, and we need to apply that intersectional analysis to the climate crisis as well. And so thinking about these expectations of workers and the standards, everything that we've spoken about today really reflects these expectations, and all of you have in the conversation we've had have drawn out the need to act locally and globally, the justice, wealth, power, and resource implications of climate policy. We've spoken about both the mitigation. Oh, sorry, Anna. I think if you're typing there, we can hear you.
Sorry, I thought I was on mute. Apologies.
Yeah. So I just to say, I think this is not something that is very far from what we're already doing, which is great to hear. Great to see. And of course, we have the focus in particular on sustainability in that particular value, but it's also important to consider, how do we bring all of the different values to bear on our work around climate justice. So it's taking again those traditional values and the traditional skills that we have and applying it to the question of climate change. How do we support people to collectively organize, to be empowered and participate in decision making from a human rights and anti-discrimination framework, working towards justice and sustainability. So we're applying all of the tools and the values that we already have to bring them to bear on the question of climate justice. And I think, as many people have said already, we have something really unique to bring to the conversation, because up until very recently, conversations around sustainability have been narrowly focused on scientific, technical, engineering, measures that need to be taken, or potentially could be taken to address the crisis, without a focus on the social implications, without a focus on justice and equality. And that's led to the impasse that we're now sort of trying to overcome in society, where there's strong general belief in the need for climate action, but when we dig down into the specifics of that, we get bogged into conflict in society. So the role of community work is to begin to work with communities to address that conflict from a justice and equality lens. I think is crucial. Crucial in ensuring that climate action is fair, but also that it brings everybody along in the process, in the dialogue, that it values the voices of all, and particularly make sure that the voices of those most impacted are front and center. And again, we've touched on this in our conversation quite a bit already, but I do want to just sort of foreground the justice question in the climate crisis. And Ian Goff speaks about it as a triple injustice, pointing out that the communities and groups who contribute least to climate change by having the least resource consumption are the ones who suffer most from its effects, and who are disproportionately disadvantaged by policy that's drawn up to address it, whether that's because the policy is class blind or gender blind, or doesn't take into account the differential impacts on marginalized communities. So Ian Goff's work he's a social policy analyst, and his work is quite interesting, and I just wanted to signpost that. And Anne says, least afford to adapt. Yeah, absolutely. And just on the point of policy being blind to the needs of a diverse population. There's a student here in the university who's doing a social policy master's on the new climate action plan, and I was speaking to her about it recently, and she did an analysis of the action plan, and the plan mentions gender, women, and feminism about 4 times in a 180-page document, and most of those mentions are connected to Ireland's global commitment, and so it's as if gender is a problem out there, but isn't an issue to be addressed in communities in Ireland, and how we go about designing climate action. So that student is doing some really interesting work on dismantling and critiquing that standpoint. So stay tuned, I suppose, for that analysis in the next couple of months. So taking a climate justice approach, climate justice as as an idea, as a concept, very much came from the grassroots, you might say, from communities and movements who most, particularly in the global south, impacted by climate change. But it has begun to really impact on policy spaces and political discussion in Ireland and globally. And a key champion of climate justice has been Mary Robinson, who established the Mary Robinson Foundation for Climate Justice. And I offer here Mary Robinson's principles of climate justice as a sort of a jumping off point, but I do acknowledge that, Mary Robinson wasn't the first and isn't the only person that speaks about climate justice or that articulates these principles. But I think she offers us a useful summary. So when we talk about climate justice, she suggests these are the elements that contribute to it. We're talking about the protection and the respecting and protecting human rights, supporting the right to development, particularly in the global south, that communities and marginalized groups have the right to lift themselves out of poverty. We need to respect that right. It's about sharing the benefits and the burdens of climate change equitably. So who, again, back to Seamus's point that often the biggest villains arrive on private jets. So how are we and have the most resources to continue to pollute and just pay the expense of the carbon tax? So how do we ensure that we're designing policies that redistribute the benefits of a good quality environment and ensure the burdens are shouldered equitably? Then ensuring that decisions on climate change are participatory, transparent, and accountable. So this is ensuring that people most impacted are heard and listened to in the process. Their voices are front and center. That we highlight gender equality and gender equity in the process of climate policy design. That we harness the transformative power of education for climate stewardship. So looking at global citizenship education as a means of supporting people and equipping people with the resources to respond to climate change, and using effective partnerships to secure climate justice. So this is about dialogue between civil society and the state and other actors to work towards climate justice. So I think it's important just to offer a bit of a definition for what we mean by climate justice, and these principles are helpful to do that. I'm going to keep going. If anybody wants to ask a question, feel free to throw up a hand. But there's a couple more things I want to get through before I have to hand back over. So in thinking about this question of balancing the right to development and balancing the need to support well-being for all communities and groups with the need to address consumption and overconsumption and patterns of pollution. The work of Kate Raworth, I think, is really helpful. She was a policy analyst working for Oxfam when she developed this donut framework, and subsequently gone on and wrote a number of books and developed resources for what she calls donut economics. So the donut, as you can see there, is this central green area, which we could call the safe and just space for humanity. And the two outer ring, or the outer and the inner ring of the donut, represent the environmental ceiling. So this the space that we can't kind of go beyond in order to live on a healthy, balanced planet. And then the social foundation is the inner ring of the donut. So what we can't fall below if we want to ensure rights and development for all people on the planet. So this is the key challenge really of sustainable development, to remain within the donut, meeting the basic needs of everyone on the planet and protecting human rights for all without overshooting these planetary boundaries. And there's a huge amount of resources there from Kate Raworth in the link on the slide, a great TED talk where she explains her ideas and offers a couple of signposts and resources. So that's all there for you to take a look at, and as a framework for understanding how we balance justice and equality with planetary sustainability. I think it's really clear and helpful. So just thinking about where we are now in terms of that balance, this is the current picture. We've got quite a significant shortfall in terms of meeting the rights of all peoples on the planet, and this is what the SDGs are aiming to address, and quite a significant overshoot in a number of crucial planetary support systems, including, as you can see there, climate change, but also biodiversity loss. We need to recognize we're in what scientists are calling the sixth mass extinction period now. So a significant amount of change is required to begin to be able to balance balance ourselves within the donut, within that safe and just operating space for humanity. And again, the work that to develop these planetary boundaries and this framework is done by the Stockholm Resilience Centre, and they're worth checking out to understand that a bit better. So thinking then about the policy landscape, and it is quite complicated, the climate policy landscape, and it's ever moving and constantly changing as debates go on, and we're moving into the implementation phase of the action plan now in Ireland. But just to give you a whistle-stop sort of tour, at a global level, we've got the Paris Agreement, as Seamus mentioned earlier, the Global Agreement on Climate Action, and the Sustainable Development Goals, both of which were agreed in 2015. And these are the key sort of global frameworks that Ireland has signed up to and is working towards nationally and in partnership with the EU. At the European level, there's again quite a significant number of frameworks and policies that are evolving. The EU's major response to climate change is the European Green Deal in 2019, which came alongside the European Climate Pact and climate law, and also policies around youth and Erasmus Plus, making climate a priority, and the Just Transition Mechanism, which is a mechanism to redistribute wealth to areas impacted by the shutting down of fossil fuel industries like the coal mines in the Ruhr, or in Ireland, the peat producing regions in the Midlands. At a national level, we have our national implementation plan for the SDGs. That has run out, and we're waiting to have it replaced. We've got a EU Climate Justice Fund since 2019, and since 2021 we've got a Community Climate Action Programme, which is a similar fund for community organisations managed by Pobl. We also have our new climate law from last year, the 2021 Climate Act, and following from that, the 2021 Climate Action Plan, which CWI has done Anna Rachel has done a summary of, and is available on the website, the CWI website. At a local level, then we've got, we had traditionally the Local Agenda 21 Fund. That fund, I actually haven't been able to find information about it online recently. I think it is now closed and has been superseded by the Community Climate Action Programme, but it may, other people who work in local authorities may know more than me about that. And we also have a number of other initiatives. So we've got the establishment of what are known as the CAROs, the Climate Action Regional Offices. And these are regional offices that support a number of local authorities to build capacity around climate action. And they are guided by a climate action charter and by a strategy document and a number of strategy documents, actually, including the adaptation strategy for local authorities. So again, whistle-stop tour here, just to give you a sense of the sort of different levels of policy making and how they relate to each other and interact, with the caveat that this all might change tomorrow because things are moving so quickly. So we often hear the phrase in thinking about environmental issues that we should think globally and act locally. And I think it is, you know, it is a phrase worth bearing in mind, and one that is, you know, as we've discussed today in lots of different ways, is one that makes a lot of sense. But I'd like to offer another way of thinking about it, or a rephrasing of it, which is think structurally and act strategically. So think structurally and act strategically. And when we think about working on climate change as community workers, I'd encourage us to move towards that rather than think global and act local. Because think global and act local, I think, can tend to get us caught into some of the dilemmas that we've unpacked here today around placing the burden of responsibility on individuals, or taking local, making local change without connecting it to the structural and the strategic. So for the last few minutes that I have left, I'm going to offer you an example of how we might do that, think structurally and act strategically. And I'm going to take the example of food as a helpful sort of case study to think about how we might engage in a local community around an important environmental issue that has important consequences for climate justice, and do it in a way that both engages people locally and connects to the structural change that we know we need. So if we think about thinking structurally and acting strategically, the way I sort of, the framework I use to think about this is threefold. So beginning with looking at the background policies. So what are the current policies that address this issue and consider this issue? So if we're looking at food, we might consider food poverty and the policies on food poverty. And we might also consider the social determinants of health framework, which is a helpful way of thinking about the impact of access to good quality food on people's health. And then we might ask ourselves, what are other people doing in this area that is good practice, that's interesting, that's creative, that might be helpful to inspire us and draw on? So what are the approaches that have been taken by other people, other projects? And here we might look at community gardens as an approach to engaging in food issues locally and engaging people in conversations around food, or community cookery events as a way of doing that. And then finally, and I'm gonna go into detail on each of these in just a minute, but just to give you the overview. And then finally thinking about scaling up. So how do we move beyond working in the local community to scale up our impact, network with others, and begin to influence policy and structures beyond the community we're in? So working to increase our impact. And again, when we look at the food example, there's a couple of interesting initiatives that are already out there working in this way. So we've got the Healthy Cities and Counties Network, HSE initiative, and we also have food policy councils as an initiative to address the food system and bring together stakeholders in the food system. So I'm going to go through each of these examples in a bit more detail now. Does anybody have any comments before I do? And I'm looking at the clock here again.
Can I just interrupt there and just tell you I have to log out now and have to go, so I'm sorry about that.
Thanks, Siobhan. Do you want to tell us what you're taking away with you?
Well, I don't know. I suppose I'm, you think you're doing loads, but I suppose it's a drop in the ocean. I feel like that. I feel like there's always room for improvement. We could be doing more, I guess. And just even around my own house here, I'm kind of thinking that, so it's a bit overwhelming. I'm not gonna lie. It feels like we have a kind of a lot to do,
Thanks, Siobhan. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much. I enjoyed it though, just to say that as well. It was very, very interesting.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks a million now. Bye for now.
Bye, bye, bye.
I think the key word I took away from Siobhan's comments there were overwhelming. I'm just wondering how are other people feeling at this point? Would it be more useful to stop and take time to reflect and chat, or do you want me to keep going with the?
Sorry, I didn't mean that in a negative way. You know, I suppose, you know, when you think of your own day-to-day stuff, like I suppose there's lots to be done. I didn't mean that to sound negative at all. I thought it was very interesting and I enjoyed it, you know.
No, I understand, of course. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to log out.
That was a question for everyone else. Are we?
Sorry, I'm going to log out. So bye, everyone.
Bye, Siobhan.
Bye bye.
How are we feeling? Are we feeling like we can take 3 more slides of information, or? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Don't say I didn't ask you.
Maybe take the 3 slides, Jamie, and then maybe a bit of a conversation amongst us all about what can we do as community workers, what can we do, and building on this as an example.
Yeah. Okay. So looking then at that sort of threefold framework for thinking structured, active, and strategic. So we've got taking the background policies, looking at, you know, what are the policy frameworks that we are working within and might want to influence or engage with. So in terms of food policy, if we're developing a project around food, looking at the research, could help to give us a bigger picture of the issues. And we've got in Ireland, some people might, or many people here might remember the Combat Poverty Agency, which has sort of become sort of part of community work lore at this stage. You know, a lot of the community work students in Maynooth wouldn't have heard of combat poverty, but obviously had a big and important impact in its day. And they've done work on food poverty and policy. So we have, of course, in Ireland, food poverty indicators. So looking at these indicators would give us a sense of, you know, how does the state measure food poverty, and give us an ability to look at you know, how food poverty might be manifesting in our community. Then we have the social determinants of health, another important policy framework, which many people may be aware of. I know it's been important in addressing health outcomes for travellers, and it's something Paddy Point have been working on quite a bit. And again, it just helps us to contextualize the issue of food in sort of you know, a wider framework, looking at health outcomes for our community beyond the individual making choices around you know, buying certain types of food, looking at the context of that. Then in terms of practice examples, one from Galway that I found really inspiring is the Let's Get Galway Growing work that the Galway City Partnership does, linking together community gardens across the city. And there's a short film there about the West Side Community Garden. And community gardens are, you know, a bit like men's sheds, you know, a fantastic tool for bringing people together to start conversations, you know, as they work side by side about food, about the food system, having conversations around, you know, some of these bigger, you know, issues that we've touched on. You know, what are the root causes while you're digging in the roots? It's a potential tool for consciousness raising, but also a potential tool for addressing some of the needs maybe in communities for access to good quality food by actually growing it yourself and rebuilding those skills and building resilience in community around food growing. So then another practice example again from Galway that I find inspiring, and I don't know if they're still on the go, and the melting potluck. They may not have survived COVID, but it was a really interesting in its time project, bringing together people to share food and using food as a tool for cultural exchange. So again, you can see how you know, this is addressing or potentially addressing climate issues, but also linking into you know, other concerns that we might have as practitioners in a community and connecting people really tangibly to climate issues in a practical way. And then our third sort of element of the framework in terms of increasing impact. So where are the other people working on these issues that we might connect in with in order to amplify our voices and increase our impact? So in terms of food, you have the Healthy Cities and Counties network established by the HSE. A number of cities and counties involved, 7 at present, and working to include local people in decision making around implementing the Healthy Ireland strategy at a local level. Food policy councils are also a really interesting example of ways in which people are scaling up to increase impact. And we have a food policy council in Cork, and there are other examples in the UK, Edinburgh and Bristol being particularly interesting. And these are spaces that seek to connect all the different actors in a food system, from producers to consumers, to policymakers and shops and supermarkets, to talk about and address injustices and questions of sustainability in the food system. So you can see here in Edinburgh, they've identified 6 key actions around health and well-being, environment, economy, land use, buying food, and again, food is a tool for cultural exchange and cultural change. And so food policy councils and this whole approach of bringing together different stakeholders is again, I think, a really exciting way of scaling up and amplifying our impact. So that's my whistle-stop tour of climate policy and some ideas about how we might think structurally and act strategically on climate justice as practitioners. I'm going to stop sharing and as Anne said, open up the space for conversation now.
Jamie, I think that was very interesting. There's loads of food for thought. I think what really struck me is the donut. When you showed the donut, you know, the subsequent photo you showed with the donut, I'm going to say skewed or out of sync. I suppose it presented very clearly the scale of the challenges, but then when you go on to the kind of practical steps that communities can take, while they might be on a small scale, it is about the multiplier effect to it. And I suppose empowering people to sort of take some initiative in their own lives, you know, which builds their own resilience. So I thought that was it was a good flow, you know, because when I saw that donut out of sync, I kind of thought, oh, well, I think the woman who left mentioned the word overwhelmed. I kind of felt, oh my good God, the scale of the issues that have to be tackled. But it's having those kind of concrete examples is really useful. I know, I think it was Anne shared one in the link as well. It's just around recycling social enterprise in Galway. Like there's loads of examples of good practice going on around the country. That might, you know, and some of you've identified examples in your presentation which give you, I suppose, hope, you know, for the power that communities can take to do something, you know, do something that's within their control in a local context, while also, but it's the importance then of us as community workers resourcing that engagement with policy, you know, whether it's at local or national or international level. But yeah, I just thought the really did feel overwhelmed when I saw that. I just think donut, but the follow on from that was useful in that context.
So maybe if we just focus the discussion then for a few minutes on, you know, what can we actually do as community workers? And I know in work we've been doing with Pavy Point, we were looking at, you know, within the organisation, what can the likes of Pavy Point, which is a big national organisation, do? What can we do in relation to the direct community work that Pavy Point undertakes, so in the groups that they meet and all of that sort of thing? And then at a policy level, from the perspective of Pavy Point, obviously being a national representative organisation at a policy level. So, and that's just a suggestion. We can structure it any way you want, but just to throw that out there and just supposed to remind ourselves that like it is a spectrum of actions, and we shouldn't, I suppose, go on the one hand that this is too small, it's not going to make a difference, you know, which you might say about a community garden. Actually, the community gardens are, you know, you can use it as a stepping stone for so much as, or it's too big, you know, it's too big, we wouldn't be able to do that, or we wouldn't be able to replicate that. So not to get stuck, I think, at either end of the spectrum, but look at what the possibilities are in between those two things. So what do people think in terms of action in your own organizations, in your own work, and at a policy level? Or turn off the old, or turn on the microphones now for this bit.
Enid, do you want to come in? I see you made a comment in the chat there.
Yeah, I have to apologize. My internet is shocking, so it's coming and going. But I've really enjoyed the I was going to say the morning, but it's well into the afternoon now, and it's been very, very thought-provoking. No, I just like the idea of the process being as important as the outcome, because that's where I kind of see everything happening now. You know, years and years ago, there was allotments in every tiny little village, and then they just disappeared. And now they're back again. Well, they're not back again, but allotments are, you know, you can find them again, I suppose. And I suppose in my neck of the woods, just seeing that community spirit, just seeing, even just tasting your own food, you know, it's different. And more people are experiencing that again, because we've forgotten how to do an awful lot. You know, my grandparents would have done a lot of stuff that now people think is brand new, you know. So I just love the process. I really love the process. And I'm working with a lot of Ukrainians at the moment, and they have come over with the skills that we have forgotten. You know, they don't seem to be as disposable as we have become. They like to cook, they like to grow. So it's a good reminder of a direction where we should be heading, I suppose. I think I'm rambling a bit now, but I loved the session, and thank you so much. I don't know whether you heard any of that, because my
It was really, really good. Yeah. Thanks, Enid.
Can I ask
Somebody
a
else?
question? Sorry, thanks, Anne. Can I ask a question? And Enid, I think you're touching on a lot. There's so much, you know, coming out of that presentation. So thanks a million, Jamie. And this question is to you or to the panel, but like what always strikes me sometimes with some of the initiatives that we do, I often wonder, are they too, is there too much of a narrow focus? And should there be a concerted effort, I guess, maybe to join with these kind of broader based movements like the Fridays for Future or even Extinction Rebellion, you know, that are, you know, there's traction there. And I think maybe it was you, Pauline, that said it at the start, sorry now, but that you marched with the young people, and you're saying our children are marching, you know, and, you know, should we be in solidarity with our young people, because they're showing, you know, phenomenal leadership and have managed to coordinate and organize a global campaign, you know, so it's something that's quite a huge achievement. And could we piggyback on some of that momentum, or is there a need maybe just to diversify the response, exactly like you were saying, Anne, that the responses have to be many, you know, it's not just one. I guess I often find myself confused in that space, going, what's the best route to take? And then along with that, then, I mean, fundamentally in my work and my life, most people I come across are good people, are conscientious, are interested in their neighborhoods and their communities and global issues. And sometimes it's just of, God, I didn't realize that, or I didn't know, you know. So is there room for that information campaign to start that kind of conscious raising process, where we mightn't have those access to these kind of wider groups around conversations, you know, or for the dialogue? Is there something there around an information campaign going, did you know, or if you choose to look up, you know, I don't know, where your clothes shop sources their cotton or whatever it is, you know, there could be just you know, something around just giving people the tools to make the choices, because I do think fundamentally people will make an effort to do the right thing. And I think there's a a backlash nearly against, you know, middle class Ireland for their cycle lanes and, you know, eco cars or electric cars, and I understand that, but I do think it's people who are trying to do the right thing, and this is what's been presented to them, you know, as a positive option. That's really long, convoluted kind of a question, but that's my thoughts after this. Thanks.
Okay. Jamie, do you want to respond?
I got stuck into the second part of the question, right, and I forgot what the first part was.
What's the best strategy? Is it about joining?
Yeah. I think it's an interesting question to ponder, and like, what's our role in relation to social movements like Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, you know, and I think I personally I've tried to kind of straddle that in a way, you know. I'm both a community worker and an activist, but I occupy different spaces and places at different times, and I think as community work practitioners, though, you know, we're not a social movement. We're sort of there through the ebb and flow of the movement. You know, I think the energy will rise and fall with these movements, but we'll be there day in and day out, and can support and resource people to go and join the movements. You know, that would be my sort of take on our role within that sort of ecosystem of social change, in a way, and you know, particularly guided by the standards. You know, that our role isn't to advocate on behalf of anybody necessarily, but to support people to advocate on behalf of themselves. And then the second piece, what struck me there, Raid, was you know, thinking about the role that we have to play in creating space for conversations, and I think that they need to take place in real life, around the table with a cup of tea, you know, having a dialogue like we did today, where we recognize and value people's, you know, intuitive analysis of what's wrong and what needs to change, rather than, you know, potentially beating them over the head again about not making the right consumer choice or not making the right kind of decisions around how they spend their money or whatever. So I think it has to be a process of opening up the conversation, allowing people to express their fears and their concerns and build their critical analysis, rather than an information campaign.
So I might just open it up to anybody else who wants to either throw in a question or a comment or an idea for something that can be done.
I suppose for me, I'm thinking some sort of training program around, like, train the trainer on how to bring it to the community in a sensitive way, as I mentioned earlier, without the judgment and blame of the individual, that are also on the SDG goals as being needing, like, supports. Also, I had it in my head a second ago, but I think it's twofold. Again, yeah, I mean, it's solid stuff, right? As a feminist organisation, Women's Collective Ireland are education providers, basic education, personal development, digital skills, literacy, and community conversations on different social issues. So we try, how we deliver our conversations and our education is by webbing in the feminist agenda into how we deliver programs. And I think around climate justice, it's that strategy can be, because, like, if I put up a poster on our social media and in our local kind of community centre area saying, you know, come to an 8-week course on climate justice, we wouldn't get a response. But we need to web it into our everyday matter, our everyday delivery. And I think because when women's groups first started 30 plus years ago, and a lot longer in some places, but locally here, we couldn't use the word feminist. We had to use the word women, and you know, and personal development and chats and stuff like that. And it's only in more recent years, feminist. The word feminist still frightens people away.
I'm sorry to cut you slightly short, Pauline, but I think you've made the point really, really well. And I'm just conscious of time and just see if anybody else wants to throw in a quick comment or a suggestion for action. Or indeed what you would like to see as next steps. You know, would you like to see, you know, a similar a gathering that we could convene that would really focus in on action?
Can I just jump in? I'm not sure it's responding to your second point there, but I'd love to just very briefly share something, because I was really taken by what you were saying, Jamie, in relation to thinking structurally, acting strategically. And there's a project just up the road from where I live in Garva, People's Forest Project, and the coordinator there has been using the donut with and in her work with the community probably for just over a year now. And the reason why I just wanted to mention it was because when you look at that, it does seem kind of, whoa, how do I even begin to engage with it? Certainly from a sort of community point of view. But they have really gotten involved big style with it, and have started now to think about their own community in relation to those different factors and where they feel the community is. And they're doing it in really creative ways, building their own donuts and, you know, doing what community work practice does, doing it well. But the point I wanted to make was actually it lends itself really well to supporting people to think structurally and then think strategically in relation to their own communities and the issues that their community is experiencing. She'd love to, I think, probably connect with you in terms of some of the ideas that you've been talking about today. But I just think it is actually really helpful to share examples of people being able to use those types of tools in practice and how accessible they can be.
Thanks for that, Anna. We literally have 1 minute left. Is there any final comment before I hand back to Ciara?
I just had one comment, which is that there's a lot of very good examples. Anna's just given us one. There are a lot of examples of where communities are taking action that a lot of us don't know about, you know, north and south. So I think there could be a good opportunity for more direct exchange with projects that are doing stuff on an all-island basis, and kind of creating a space to share those.
So there's something about upskilling ourselves. There's something about opening up conversations in a skilled and sensitive way, and there's something about learning about action that's being carried out in other areas to give us ideas of where we might start. Yeah, it's a really good suggestion. Okay, well, I hand back to you then, Ciara, just to close it off. Thanks, everybody.
And Natasha there has said she'd love further training on the donut approach. So that could be something.
Could I just say one last thing, just to pick up again on what you were saying, Pauline, around the 6-week course, because I've been there myself, you know, trying to run a course on climate change and nobody turns up. And I in thinking about that and, you know, what went wrong and where we could have done things differently, I sort of went back to thinking about, you know, people like Paulo Freire and the idea of the listening survey, you know, and taking time to listen to what are the key concerns that keep coming up again and again. So it might not be about climate change or climate justice, but it might be about energy prices, or it might be about the home heating, or, you know, whatever it is that generates a bit of energy and a bit of interest in the community, that through conversation you can then connect to, well, let's go find out why energy prices have gone up, and from there end up, you know, opening up the conversation around climate and moving into that space.
Thanks, Jamie. We've gone past the hour of 3 o'clock when we're supposed to finish. I suppose just like to thank everyone for their input and interest they've shown today. I think in lots of ways what's obvious has left all of us with a lot of food for thought and the possibility for future actions. So I think myself and Anne and Rachel and Jamie need to take that away and see how we can best, I suppose, address some of the things people identified as further steps to be taken, how we can support it. Yeah, after today, there will be the presentations from or Jamie's presentation from today will be issued to people, and there will be the follow-up resource strategy guide, I think we're calling it, but as Anne said, we do need a bit more time with that. And don't forget to fill out the survey if you haven't done so already. Anne will send a link with it in the email, but it's in the chat as well. And is there any like one word people want to say about how they're feeling before we finish off the screen? I'm feeling hopeful. I think there's energy in the room. I'm feeling hopeful. There's will to do something. So I'm going to, anyone else like something they'd like to say?
Thanks for the great resources, everybody, and I'm feeling a bit informed, but still very inadequately equipped to bring it to my community.
Thanks, Pauline. Raid, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, just thanks a million. Really good. Ready for the revolution. Here we go.
Thanks, Raid.
Thank
Natasha.
you.
Natasha?
Sorry, I popped something in the chat there. I very much echo what Pauline says there. Hopeful, but still a little bit at a loss to how to embrace it and how to implement it and make it impactful.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. Seamus, do you want to say anything? Might be gone. Anna, I see you put something into the chat.
Yeah, it's there already. I thought it was really, really good, informative and engaging session. And the only other thing I was going to say was Extinction Rebellion were mentioned earlier. And there's another great little Facebook page, if any of you are into Lego or your children are, called Lego Rebellion, which is linked to the Extinction Rebellion campaigns, but it's all Lego based. And
thanks, Anna.
It's really informative.
Thanks, Anna. Maria?
Yeah, I just left with a lot to ponder. So thanks for that. And yeah, just looking forward.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks. Enid.
Hi, yeah, a lot to think about. Thank you very much. It was great.
Thanks, Enid. Anna, Rachel, do you want to say anything before we're okay?
Just thanks to everybody, and I think we've got a good bit of, we will definitely take away your ideas and kind of try to undertake some follow-up action from today. So thanks everyone, and thanks to Jamie.
Thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're free to go. I'm sure people have other meetings and work to get on to. Thanks a million.
And thanks, Ciara and Anne and Rachel, for the opportunity to be
Thanks a million, Jamie.
Bye. I forgot about you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.